All right, so it is time to start building the drawer boxes, and my final thickness of drawer box is going to be 1/2 inch thick. And right now I'm starting out with 4/4 material, and instead of sending this through the planer and planing off half this material, turning half of it into sawdust, I'm going to peel off a couple of layers as shop sawn veneers. And what I'm going to do with those shop sawn veneers is veneer this birch plywood, and that will be my drawer bottoms. So by shop sawing a couple of strips of veneer off of each one of the boards that I'm going to use to build the drawer box out of, we'll guarantee that it's all came from the same board, so it's all the same color. And that and cherry plywood is stupid expensive right now, and this birch plywood was super inexpensive, so I'm just going to veneer it up. So let's get started shop sawing some veneers. All right, so I finished resawing the drawer sides and got those guys milled down. And then the pieces of veneer that I resawed off the drawer sides to save material, I have got prepped and ready to veneer to our panels. This just saves a nice bit of material, and then also the color and grain match the sides of the drawer. These two big ones are for the filing cabinet. And then I have the rest of them off to the side here waiting their turn to be glued up for the other drawers. And when I was resawing the veneers, I made sure that I kept track of the board and how they came off, so that way all my drawer fronts will be in the same colorway coming off the same board. So I'm going to get these guys glued up, and then we'll get to work on the frame and the handle. All right, I have several more drawer fronts to veneer, but I don't want to exceed the set time of the glue. So I'm going to put these guys in the bag and seal it up and start the pump. And then once I get the other ones ready to go, then I'll put those in here. So that way I don't have to rush so much to get it all in the bag before the glue sets. And once I pull a vacuum on this bag and suck these down tight, it shouldn't bother at all to release it just for a minute, because it should stay adhered pretty well while I switch it out. All right, I'm getting ready to build a face frame for the drawer fronts. I've already milled and ripped to width the material here. So next I just need to cut it to length. And so I'm going to set up a stop at the table saw to cut these guys to length. And when I cut the rails to length, I'm going to cut the center panel to the same length at the same time to help improve my accuracy, so that when I do the dados for these to slide in, they'll fit perfectly. All right, so I have all my parts cut to length. Now I need to cut a groove in here for this panel to slide into. Normally I would do that on the table saw, but on the top rail, I don't want that groove to show. So if we look at this drawer we made in a previous video, you can see where the tongue and groove comes into play there. Now I don't want that to show, because on the top of these drawers, we're gonna have an integrated drawer pull, something similar to this, and I don't think it's going to look very good with that showing. So we're going to cut them out on the router table so I can make a stopped dado there and not have the groove come all the way through. All right, so I have a 1/4 inch router bit set up here, set up to the depth I need. I think I'm going to be able to take it in one pass. I don't think that's too much in cherry wood. And I have it set up so it'll cut down the center of this board. And then I have stop and start points right here, so that way when I'm cutting, I can still make room for the groove, but this won't show through on our handle detail. I'm still going to run it through this way, flip it around, and then run it through this way just to 100% make sure that that groove is centered on the panel. It'll make the rest of the joinery easier. So I'm going to start by dropping it down and I'm going to go all the way through because the bottom doesn't matter. Then I'll spin it around, go all the way through until I get to my stop point here. All right, right now I'm cutting the tongues to fit the grooves for the rails and stiles of our drawer fronts. Then I'm going to switch over to cutting a rabbet for the drawer front so it'll slide into that groove. All right, so we got our tongues on here and we got a nice tight fit. So it fits pretty well. But on the stop dado side of things, we need to relieve either this to square it up or round this off. So even though round tenons are dumb, I think that's going to be the easiest way to do this. So I'm just going to round this guy over. So I'm just going to score the shoulder mark. Just going to remove a little material along the shoulder, make sure it seats tight. And then just round this guy over a little. All right. All right, it's time to make the drawer handle. This is my prototype piece. The original piece is going to be made out of walnut. And this took several steps to make. So I did a practice run just to make sure I could build the concept. And now we're going to do the real thing. So let me show you what I got set up to create this handle. All right, so first step, I have a large nose bit and I'm going to take several passes to get to my depth, and that is what's going to create the underside for the fingers to grab into. All right, so I want my cove to go right up to this line. So I set my square up here, so that way I can measure from the bottom up to raise my bit up to its final height. I'm gonna do a test stab here just to see how we do before I do the whole thing. All right, we need to go just a tiny bit higher. All right, so I'm going to change my bull nose bit out for a thumbnail bit. This is has a long swoop. It starts out fairly shallow and then gets steeper as it goes. So it's a little bit different than a standard round over bit. All right, so this thumbnail bit worked out really well to create this shape. 2 passes, route the curve on the top side of the handle, and then flip it over to route the curve going into the bottom of the handle. So yeah, I think that worked out pretty well. So now we're going to set up to cut a dado. We're going to remove this amount of material here down to our thickness, and this section is what's going to be glued onto our drawer itself. All right, so now I need to cut this swoop here on both sides, and I want both sides to be exactly the same, and I want each handle to be exactly the same. So I devised this little jig here, and basically it has a follower curve that follows this main curve. And if you look at this handle, it starts out really shallow and then gets steeper as it goes. So that curve changes as it goes. So when I created this jig, I had to create that offset that has that same shape of the curve, just bigger. So I'll show you how I made this jig after I show you how the jig works. But basically you clamp it in here, and that follower block follows you along all the way out to the other side. And then you flip it over and cut the other side. So let's cut a few, and then I'll show you how I built the jig. All right, so to make this jig, so it just follows through here and makes that curve to cut everything out and cut out that, which basically is a compound curve. It starts out straight, a little shallow curve, and then a lot steeper at the end. Basically what I did is I glued two pieces of scrap plywood together. That's important that you'll see here in a minute. I made a template, a paper template of what I wanted, and I drew it on here, and I left it a little bit ½ inch long. I just extended that line out. And then I cut my curve, the bandsaw. Once I had that curve cut out, I measured over on my end line, drilled a hole. This number is kind of arbitrary. It just needs to be, from this distance to this distance, needs to be wide enough to hold the clamping mechanisms. All right, and then I took some paper. All right, and then I took a pin and I stuffed it in that hole, and that's why it's 2 layers thick, because the taper of the pin is about as thick as 1 sheet of plywood. So 2 sheets will get you into the meat of the pin so it stays stationary. All right, and then I just set this up against the blade, hold the pin down, and when I did it the first time, it didn't rip the paper. When you demonstrate on camera, it always goes wrong. Here we go backwards. All right, it was easier the first time, but that you can see there is our curve. I used my square to square off the edge of the table to draw in a line to line up. All right, so now I have my curve and I have a line drawn in here so I can reposition the paper onto the jig. So basically I took the piece of paper off of here and lined it up here and then cut that curve out at the bandsaw. So now when I position this down, this line right here is this line that lines up with the blade. So then I can just square it up to this edge right here. And so it's squared up to the blade there. Clamp it down. And the piece that I cut off right here is this piece right here. And the reason why it has this felt on it is because I want to make sure this piece clears the top of this when it swings around. So that way it just swings around like this, and this piece clears that, and this basically just acts as a fence to butt your workpiece to. So slide that guy in there like that, clamp it down, cut him out. Piece of cake. All right, so the router left a point here, and I don't really have a good way to get rid of that point with the router, so I'm just gonna pinch it between two dogs here. And then I'm going to use my block plane just to plane that off in kind of a rounded fashion, similar to what I did with this guy. And to help make sure they're all consistent as I plane, I'm gonna count the number of strokes that I make going in this direction, and then how many times it takes to rotate it, and that way each one will come out pretty close to the same. All right, next I'm going to clean up the saw marks left behind by the bandsaw at the spindle sander and just clean that up. All right, so got my drawer fronts assembled and glued up, and there's just a little bit of a ridge that's not flush here, so I'm just going to hit it with the hand plane to clean it up. All right, so I'm going to finish sanding it up, sand off my pencil marks, and then we'll glue the handle on. All right, I got my drawers all sanded up and my handles all sanded up. And this little notch here is where this handle's gonna go. So I'm gonna slide this guy in there. Nice tight fit. That looks pretty good. So once they're in the drawer themselves, I think that's pretty good. So, and by the way, this handle style I borrowed from the Wood Whisperer on his, he did something similar on his executive desk. So I liked it, so I'm borrowing it, stealing the idea. All right, so I'm gonna put a piece of tape across here so I don't get a bunch of glue squeeze out on this board and glue these guys on. All right, so this guy's dry enough to take the clamps out, but the seam is still a little bit tacky. So I'm just going to clean up any kind of glue squeeze out while it's still a little tacky. Peel my tape. All right, so we're just a little bit proud after I glued this on here. So I'm just going to take a hand plane and flatten this off, and then I'll sand it in and blend it in once I'm done. All right, and just like I did on the front and sides of the desk, I'm continuing that copper grid pattern around onto the bottom drawers, and I'm using the exact same technique to create the grid and glue the copper on. All right, so I also made some accessories. This ladder we milled in earlier will hold this little shuttle, and that guy can index wherever it needs to be depending on how full your cabinet drawer is, your file drawer is. And that will prevent your files from going all the way to the back if you only have, you know, a little bit. And then you can just move it back as your files grow. So that's that guy. And then I built a pencil tray to keep all your pencils, pens, and other accessories, paper clips, and stuff like that. All right, thanks for watching.